The morning mist clings to the damp earth of a Norman field, France, late July 1944. The air is heavy with the smell of diesel, crushed grass, and a distant lingering cordite. In the gray pre-dawn light, a shape resolves itself from the shadows. It is angular, monolithic, a predator resting. This is a Tiger I Schwer Panzerabteilung 101 *. Its 88 gun, over 8 feet long, points west, toward the distant rumble of the front. The crew moves with a quiet, professional rhythm, loading a massive, high-velocity, armor-piercing round. They are tired but confident. For them, this machine is more than steel and optics. It is a psychological weapon. They have seen it before: the distant flash of an Allied tank, the frantic turn of its turret, the futile puff of its return fire against their sloped, 100 and thick frontal armor, and then the devastating roar of their own gun. One shot, one kill. It is a mantra born in the deserts of North Africa and the steppes of Russia. In their minds, they are invincible. They believe their tank is unbeatable. They do not yet know that the true force gathering against them in the hedgerows is not a superior machine, but an unyielding tide of production, adaptation, and the raw, stubborn grit of the men sent to fight in what they call the Tommy Cooker. The Tiger was not born from a mere request for a new tank, but from a profound shock. On the Eastern Front in the summer of 1941, advancing German panzer divisions encountered the Soviet KV-1 and T-34. Standard German anti-tank guns, the 37 Paquet 36, were useless. Crews watched in horror as their rounds bounced harmlessly off the Soviet slopes, earning the gun the sardonic nickname Hirasanklopfjarret, the Army Door Knocker. For the first time, the German army faced a technological inferiority that threatened to blunt their blitzkrieg. The response was immediate and uncompromising. Hitler himself demanded a breakthrough tank of unprecedented power and protection. The order went to two rival firms, Henschel and Porsche. The design philosophy was singular: create a vehicle that could engage and destroy any enemy tank at long range, while being impervious to enemy fire. This was not to be a nimble, mobile panzer for deep exploitation. It was to be a rolling fortress, a Schwerer Panzer, a heavy tank designed to dominate the battlefield from a distance, punching a hole through which lighter forces could follow. The Henschel design, under the leadership of Erwin Erdős, triumphed. What emerged from the factories in Kassel by late 1942 was a machine that redefined armored combat. The Panzerkampfwagen VI Osf, dubbed Tiger by its crews, was a colossus. At 56 tons, it dwarfed its contemporaries. Its primary weapon was the adapted 8.8 cm KWK 36L56, a tank-mounted version of the legendary Flak 18 anti-aircraft gun. This cannon could penetrate 112 m of armor at 1,000 meters, a distance from which most Allied tanks could not even effectively respond. Its armor was formidable, 100 m on the front of the turret and hull, 80 m on the sides, but this power came at a crippling cost. The Tiger was mechanically complex, powered by a 700 horsepower Maybach V12 engine that was perpetually overstressed. Suspension, the innovative overlapping road wheels designed for a smooth ride, was a maintenance nightmare, prone to freezing solid with mud or snow. It was a fuel-hungry behemoth, consuming gallons of precious petrol for every mile. And it was slow, with a top road speed of just 28 miles per hour. Yet in the hands of elite crews assigned to independent heavy tank battalions, the Schwer Panzerabteilungen, its early combat record was devastating. At Leningrad in Tunisia and at Kursk, the Tiger's reputation was forged. A single Tiger expertly positioned could hold a sector, annihilating scores of enemy vehicles. It created an aura, a psychological terror that preceded its physical arrival on the battlefield. The Germans didn't just have a new tank, they believed they had crafted an unbeatable weapon. While German engineers pursued perfection in a handful of formidable machines, an entirely different kind of war machine was awakening across the Atlantic. The United States, emerging from the Great Depression and thrust into global conflict after Pearl Harbor, faced a problem of a different scale. Not just how to build a good tank, but how to build thousands of them quickly, reliably, and ship them across two oceans. The American philosophy was not born on the battlefield, but on the assembly line. It was the doctrine of the arsenal of democracy, and its child was the medium tank M4, known to the world as the Sherman. The design brief was pragmatic. Reliability, ease of production, and mechanical simplicity were paramount. The Sherman used a proven radial aircraft engine, had a tall, roomy hull for crew comfort and maintenance access, and was designed from the outset to be built in massive numbers across multiple factories by Chrysler, Ford, Fisher Tank Arsenal. The first prototype rolled out in September 1941, a staggering feat of rapid development. The Sherman that entered service in 1942 was, by the standards of its day, a competent and balanced weapon. Its initial 75 mm3 gun was adequate against the majority of German armor it was expected to face, the Panzer III and IV. It was fast, with a top speed of 30 mph, mechanically robust, and carried a larger crew complement than most German tanks. But its design embodied critical compromises born of pre-war thinking and industrial necessity. Its armor was modest, a maximum of 75 mm on the front hull, weaker on the sides, and crucially it was vertically sloped, a significant ballistic disadvantage compared to the angled plates of the T-34 or later German designs. Its high silhouette made it an easier target. Most fatefully, its armament was not chosen to defeat the heaviest German armor, which U.S. intelligence did not fully appreciate in 1941. The Sherman was not designed to duel monsters. It was designed to be the workhorse of a mobile, combined arms army, supporting infantry breakthroughs and exploiting gaps. By the time Allied crews first glimpsed the thick, boxy outline of a Tiger through their periscopes in the Tunisian desert in early 1943, a fundamental disconnect had occurred. The Germans had built a tank to win individual duels at long range. The Americans had built a system to win a war of production and logistics. These two opposing philosophies, the quest for qualitative supremacy versus the relentless engine of quantitative output, were now on a collision course for the decisive battles of 1944. For the 5 men sealed within the Tiger's steel hull, the myth of invincibility was tempered by an unrelenting physical reality. They were an elite, often hand-picked from other units for their technical skill and combat experience. Their environment was one of intense focus and profound strain. The commander's world was the cupola. His vision a 360-degree panorama through Zeiss optics of legendary clarity. The gunner, hunched over his precise TZF-9B binocular sight, worked the traverse wheels with delicate precision, capable of aligning the massive 88 on a target 2 kilometers away. The driver and radio operator hull gunner manned the front, while the loader, the most physically taxed of all, wrestled 23-kilogram shells from the cramped storage racks in the hull floor and turret bustle. The roar of the Maybach engine was a constant throbbing presence, the heat immense, but their confidence was rooted in tangible, terrifying power. The hydraulic turret traverse, though slow, was smooth. The gun's stabilization gave them a chance to fire accurately even while moving slowly over rough ground. Most of all, they trusted in their armor. The sound of an enemy shell striking their frontal plate was not a catastrophe, but a metallic clang or a sharp crack, a reassurance of their superiority. They fought with the calm of duelists, knowing the first shot was usually the last. Yet this dueling mastery existed in a fragile bubble, entirely dependent on a vast crumbling logistical tail. The Tiger was not a tank for long advances. Its complex final drive units could fail after mere 100 kilometers of cross-country movement. The overlapping road wheels, if clogged with frozen mud, could freeze the tracks solid, requiring hours of dangerous, back-breaking labor to clear. Moving a Tiger required planning akin to moving a small building. For rail transport, its wide tracks had to be removed and special narrow transport tracks fitted, a laborious 4-hour process. Recovery of a disabled Tiger often required not one but 2 other Tigers, risking multiple irreplaceable assets. Every kilometer traveled burned 5.5 liters of fuel, a staggering drain on Germany's collapsing petroleum supply. The crew's invincibility ended the moment their engine stalled or their fuel gauge hit empty. They were knights in heavy plate, magnificent in a charge, but helpless and immobilized if their horse fell beneath them. Their war was a constant calculus of mechanical endurance, a battle against their own machine as much as against the enemy. Every engagement, every victory brought them closer to a breakdown they could not fix and a fuel Bowser that might never arrive. For the young American, British, or Canadian tanker climbing into his M4 Sherman in England in the spring of 1944, the Tiger was a specter, a monster described in briefing rooms and whispered about in pubs. Their own tank felt familiar, almost comfortable. The interior was spacious compared to most German designs. The radial engine, while loud, was reliable and easier to maintain than the complex powerplants of German armor. They trained as a team of 5, commander, gunner, loader, driver, assistant driver, bow gunner. Their doctrine was one of movement, communication, and combined arms. They were not taught to be solitary hunters, but part of a mobile, combined arms team working in concert with infantry, artillery, and air power. The 75 gun they initially trusted was a good general-purpose weapon. Its high-explosive round was excellent for blasting machine gun nests and infantry positions. In their minds, they were driving the tool of liberation. This confidence would be shattered on first contact. The term Tommy Cooker or Ronson, for the lighter that lights first time every time, was a grim post-combat joke born of horrific truth. The Sherman's ammunition was stored in unprotected racks in the sponsons along the sides of the hull. A penetrating hit, even from a medium-velocity German 75, would often ignite the powder charges, creating a flash fire that would race through the fighting compartment. Crew survival rates in a penetrated Sherman were tragically low, but the greater shock was ballistic. A gunner would spot a distant Tiger, steady his sight, fire his 75 round, and watch in disbelief as it sparked harmlessly off the enemy's glacis plate. The return flash from the Tiger's 88 would be the last thing many of them ever saw. They learned with brutal speed that in a direct, long-range duel against a Tiger in open terrain, they were hopelessly outmatched. Their armor was insufficient. their gun was inadequate. Their tall profile made them easy to spot. The myth of the Tiger became a visceral, terrifying reality, one measured in the burned-out hulks of friends' tanks littering the landscape. They had not been given a dueling weapon, they had been given a death trap, and from this profound vulnerability, a desperate, gritty form of ingenuity would be forced to evolve. The tactical employment of the Tiger was a direct reflection of its design philosophy. It was a Schwerpunkt weapon, a sledgehammer to create a breakthrough. German doctrine refined through the Schwer Panzerabteilungen was one of elite specialists integrated at a high command level. These independent heavy tank battalions were not parceled out to infantry divisions but held in reserve, deployed to critical sectors where a localized counterattack or a defensive strongpoint could shatter an Allied advance. Their ideal engagement was defensive, from a prepared camouflaged position overlooking a long field of fire, a kill zone. From 1,500 to 2,000 meters, beyond the effective range of Allied tank guns, they could methodically destroy advancing armor with near impunity. A single Tiger, well handled, could anchor an entire section of the front. The tactic was one of economical, long-range butchery, leveraging the Tiger's superior optics and gun to maximum effect. It was the apex of a duelist's art, turning the tank into a mobile, armored anti-tank gun of unparalleled potency. Their role was not to chase down fleeing enemies, but to break the spearhead of an attack, their very presence forcing the enemy to divert entire brigades to contain them. Allied doctrine, in stark contrast, saw the tank not as a solitary champion but as a component in a mechanized orchestra. The Sherman was the core of the armored division, but its purpose was exploitation and pursuit, following breaches made by infantry and artillery. The U.S. Army's Field Manual 1710, Armored Force Field Manual, emphasized speed, maneuver, and deep penetration into enemy rear areas, Rommel-style operations, ironically inspired by early German successes. In theory, tank versus tank combat was to be the job of dedicated tank destroyer battalions equipped with vehicles like the M10 Wolverine, which carried a more powerful 76 mm gun. The Sherman's job was to overwhelm with numbers, to bypass strongpoints, and to create chaos. This doctrine worked brilliantly in the open maneuvers of the 1944 Falaise pocket pursuit, but it broke down catastrophically in the close, confined terrain of the Norman bocage, where bypassing was impossible and every hedgerow concealed an ambush. Here, the Sherman was forced into the very role it was unsuited for: frontal assault against dug-in heavy armor. The collision of these two doctrines, the German precision scalpel versus the Allied blunt instrument, would force a painful and rapid evolution on the Allied side, a shift from textbook maneuver to a brutal, close-quarters battle of attrition where numbers and adaptability would be the only answer. The Tiger and the Sherman were not just weapons, they were the purest expressions of their nation's industrial souls and strategic realities. Germany, resource-poor and fighting a multi-front war of attrition, pursued a strategy of qualitative superiority. Every Tiger I represented an enormous investment of scarce raw materials: high-grade steel for its thick armor, complex alloys for its transmission, copper for its electrical systems, and vast man-hours from a skilled, increasingly stretched workforce. Production was slow, meticulous, and bottlenecked. Only 1,347 Tiger Is were built from 1942 to 1944. Each one was virtually handcrafted, with minute variations between early and late production models. This was an economy of scarcity, betting everything on the battlefield performance of a few masterpieces. It was a philosophy that mirrored the German General Staff's obsession with tactical and operational brilliance, the perfect battle plan executed by the perfect weapon. But it was a pyramid standing on its point. The loss of a single Tiger was a strategic blow, not just a tactical one. The United States, by contrast, waged war with the logic of quantitative superiority, powered by an untouched industrial base of continental scale. The Sherman was not a masterpiece, but a masterstroke of standardization and mass production. Its components were designed to be built by subcontractors across the nation and assembled on fast-moving lines. Where the Tiger's hull was a single, complex casting or welding project, the Sherman's was made from large, rolled steel plates bolted and welded together, faster and easier to manufacture. This philosophy accepted weaknesses in individual unit capability to achieve overwhelming systemic strength. In 1942 alone, the U.S. built over 7,000 Shermans. By war's end, that number would exceed 49,000. This torrent of steel meant that a destroyed Sherman could be replaced, often within days, with another from the endless stream arriving at French ports. The crew, if they survived, would be assigned a new tank. The war became a brutal equation. Germany might destroy 10 Shermans for the loss of one Tiger, but America could produce 20 new Shermans in the time it took Germany to build and deliver one replacement Tiger. This was not a battlefield duel, it was an industrial metabolism, and the Allied system was designed to absorb losses and keep moving forward, a tide that would eventually, inexorably wash over every isolated fortress. The hedgerow country of Normandy, the bocage, was a terrain no planner had fully anticipated. Ancient, dense mounds of earth, tangled with roots and topped with thick hedges, divided the countryside into thousands of small, walled fields. This labyrinth neutralized the Allied advantages in mobility and numerical superiority, while playing perfectly into the hands of the German defender. For the advancing American infantry and armor, every hedgerow was a potential ambush point, a blind corner hiding a Panzerfaust team, a machine gun nest, or worse, the long, deadly barrel of a Tiger or Panther tank. The Tiger's ideal long-range killing fields vanished. Engagements now happened at point-blank range, often less than 100 yards. In this claustrophobic green hell, the Sherman's shortcomings were magnified. A Tiger, hull down behind a hedgerow with only its formidable mantlet and gun visible, was almost impossible to dislodge. American tank crews would burst through a hedge into a small field, only to be immediately struck by an armor-piercing round they never saw fired. The psychological toll was immense. Fear of the 88 became pervasive. But necessity is the mother of invention, and from this attritional meat grinder, sheer grit and ingenuity began to forge a response. The Americans adapted with a brutal, pragmatic creativity. Infantry and tanks learned to work in even tighter bonds. Tank destroyers like the M10 were pushed forward into the spearhead despite doctrinal misuse. Most importantly, the tactics shifted from head-on assaults to overwhelming, localized combined arms attacks. Artillery observers, now equipped with radios in tanks, would call down crushing barrages on suspected German positions just before an advance. Rhino tanks, Shermans fitted with steel tusks cut from German beach obstacles, were improvised to punch through the hedgerows themselves, creating their own avenues of advance instead of channeling into kill zones at the gaps. Crews learned to use the terrain aggressively, maneuvering for flank shots, knowing a side or rear hit was their only chance. The battle was no longer about the quality of the machine in a vacuum. It was about which crew, which platoon, which combined arms team could better adapt to the hellish reality of the close-quarters fight. The Tiger's myth of invincibility began to crack not in an open field, but in the muddy, confined lanes where its technological advantages were stifled, and the relentless pressure of countless small, adaptive actions began to tell. The turning point was not a single battle, but the culmination of adaptation in three critical areas: firepower, tactics, and the sheer weight of numbers. The first and most crucial evolution was the arrival of a gun that could meet the Tiger on more equal terms. Even as the 75 Shermans fought their desperate close-range battles in Normandy, a new variant was arriving in theater: the M4A176W, and most significantly for the British and Canadians, the Sherman Firefly. The Firefly was a field modification of desperation and brilliance. British engineers crammed the formidable British 17-pounder anti-tank gun, one of the best Allied tank guns of the war, into a modified Sherman turret. The result was ungainly, with a long barrel that overhung the chassis, and the recoil was violent, but it worked. The 17-pounder's armor-piercing, discarding sabot APDS round could penetrate a Tiger's frontal armor at over 1,000 meters. Suddenly, the Tiger crew's safe engagement distance collapsed. A Sherman Firefly, carefully camouflaged with its distinctive long barrel, could now ambush the ambusher. Tactics evolved with the new technology. Fireflies were precious assets, rarely more than one per troop of 4 Shermans. They were deployed as guardians and hunters, often hanging back in cover while the standard 75 Shermans advanced as bait or provided suppressive fire. The moment a Tiger revealed itself by firing, every available weapon would concentrate on its position, not to penetrate, but to create a maelstrom of dust, smoke, and impacting shells to obscure its vision and panic its crew. This shotgun approach, saturating the area with high explosive and machine gun fire, was designed to give the Firefly the precious seconds it needed to acquire the target and fire. The old duelist's code was dead, replaced by a gang-up brawl. At the same time, improved Allied tank infantry coordination meant Tigers were increasingly vulnerable to flank attacks by infantry armed with PIATs or bazookas, creeping through the hedgerows. The arrival of the 76 armed Shermans in larger numbers by late 1944 provided more units with a capable, if not superior, tank-killing gun. The technological gap was closing, but the decisive factor remained the relentless pressure of numbers. A Tiger company, after destroying a dozen Shermans, would find itself facing another dozen the next day, and another the day after that, each encounter chipping away at their fuel, ammunition, mechanical endurance, and finally, their irreplaceable crews. The raw statistics of the Tiger's combat record present a paradoxical picture of tactical brilliance and strategic failure. Individual Tigers and their elite crews achieved staggering kill ratios. Schwer Panzerabteilung 503 reported destroying over 1,700 enemy vehicles during its service. Michael Wittmann, the most famous Tiger commander, was credited with over 130 tank kills before his death in Normandy. On paper, the machine was a devastating success, but these numbers tell only half the story. The other half is told by the dwindling order of battle of the German heavy tank battalions. Of the roughly 1,350 Tigers produced, only a fraction were ever lost in direct combat with enemy tanks. The vast majority succumbed to mechanical breakdown, fuel exhaustion, or were abandoned and destroyed by their own crews during retreats. At the Battle of the Falaise Pocket in August 1944, the remnants of several Tiger battalions were caught in the closing encirclement. Dozens of these irreplaceable machines, out of fuel or with broken final drives, were simply abandoned, their breech blocks removed and left as smoldering hulks for Allied troops to gawk at. This was the Tiger's true epitaph, not destruction by a superior tank, but death by 1,000 cuts from a system it could not defeat. The logistical collapse was absolute. A German after-action report from the Normandy campaign starkly noted, the Tiger unit's successes were far below expectations due to the permanent overstraining of the tanks during road marches, causing breakdowns and the lack of fuel and recovery means. A Tiger required a dedicated support company of recovery vehicles, tank transporters, and mobile workshops that became prime targets for Allied fighter bombers. By the time of the Ardennes offensive in December 1944, the German army could muster fewer than 300 operational heavy tanks, Tigers and King Tigers combined, for its last great gamble. They achieved local shocks like at the Battle of the Bulge, but were ultimately halted as much by fuel shortages as by Allied resistance. In contrast, the U.S. 3rd Armored Division alone lost over 600 tanks completely destroyed in the European theater, a figure that would have crippled the German war machine, yet it remained a potent fighting formation to the end, continuously re-equipped from the seemingly bottomless reserves of the arsenal of democracy. The Tiger won battles, the Sherman and the system it represented won the war of attrition. The erosion of the Tiger myth was a psychological watershed experienced by both victor and vanquished. For Allied tank crews, the change was gradual, born of hard-won experience. The initial terror of the 88 never fully vanished, but it was tempered by a growing catalog of proven counters. They learned that a Tiger's side and rear armor, while still thick, was vulnerable to their 75 gun at close range. They learned the value of maneuver, smoke, and combined arms. Most importantly, they learned that the Tiger was not supernatural. It could be tracked, it could be blinded by massed fire, it could be flanked by infantry, and it could be killed by a well-placed shot from a Firefly or a 76 Sherman. The invincible monster was recategorized in their minds as a formidable opponent, a deadly problem that could be solved with the right tools, tactics, and enough courage. This shift was not towards bravado, but towards a hardened professional confidence. The sight of a burned-out Tiger, its mighty gun drooping towards the earth, became a powerful symbol. It was proof that the seemingly unstoppable German war machine could be broken piece by piece. For the German heavy tank crews, the psychological journey was one of increasing isolation and grim realization. The early war aura of invincibility faded into the stark reality of being outnumbered, outproduced, and constantly hunted. They fought with undiminished skill, but their battles became defensive holding actions, desperate rearguard fights to cover a retreat. The comforting clang of an enemy shell bouncing off their frontal armor was now often followed by the terrifying realization that they were being engaged from multiple sides, or that their escape route had been cut off by swarming infantry. They watched their battalion's strength dwindle from 14 tanks to 5 to 2, until they were the last operational Tiger in the sector, a magnet for every Allied gun on the front. The myth had become a curse, making them a priority target for artillery barrages and fighter-bomber attacks. The crew's faith in their machine remained, but their faith in victory, and in the logistical system that was supposed to sustain them, evaporated. They were no longer the wielders of an unbeatable weapon. They were the last guardians of a doomed ideal, fighting with superb technique in a war already lost to the relentless, grinding arithmetic of industrial production. The duel between the Tiger and the Sherman transcends a simple comparison of armor and gun statistics. It stands as a timeless case study in the fundamental nature of modern industrial warfare. The Tiger represents the apex of the craftsman's art, a bespoke masterpiece of engineering designed to achieve perfection in the singular moment of combat. It was the embodiment of the belief that battlefield brilliance, technological superiority, and the will of the elite warrior could overcome any material disadvantage. For a time, this belief held terrifying power. Yet the Sherman, in all its flawed, vulnerable, and unglamorous utility, represented a deeper, more inexorable truth. It was not a masterpiece, but a component. Its strength was not in its individual capability, but in its interoperability within a vast, resilient system. A system of mass production, global logistics, standardized training, and combined arms doctrine. In the end, the hedgerows of Normandy and the fields of Europe were not decided by which tank was the better dueling machine. They were decided by which system of warfare could endure, adapt, and replace its losses. The Tiger was a magnificent answer to the question of how to win a tank duel. The Sherman and the industrial colossus behind it was the answer to the question of how to win a global war of attrition. The lesson written in Steel and Fire from 1944 is not that quality is irrelevant, but that quantity, when produced on a scale that becomes a qualitative force of its own, possesses a crushing, undeniable logic. The grit of the Sherman crews was not just in facing the Tiger's gun. It was in climbing again and again into a machine they knew was vulnerable, trusting not in the invincibility of their own armor, but in the overwhelming weight of their numbers, the ingenuity of their tactics, and the sheer relentless momentum of the cause they served. Their victory was not a triumph of the better tank, but a testament to the power of the system and the men who made it work against impossible odds.